The Tampa Bay Rays just shook up the entire catcher market, trading away Danny Jansen in a somewhat surprising move to the Milwaukee Brewers, and just 5 minutes later, acquiring catcher Nick Fortes from their in-state rival Miami Marlins. This is a big surprise as neither player were really seen as big hot commodities, and although the catcher market was somewhat thin, definitely a little bit of surprise to see these players traded when there's so many other names swirling around. And granted, most of those names aren't catchers, but still, it's very interesting to go ahead and look at this. And we will treat this as a three-team trade for the purposes of this video. Note they're two separate trades, but this all hinges on the Rays shaking up their catcher position, the Brewers shaking up their catching position, and the Marlins shaking up their catching positions. But the central position is the Tampa Bay Rays. So we'll look at this from the Marlins perspective, the Rays perspective, and from the Brewers perspective, and see what team actually weighed out well, what team maybe could have done a little bit better in the long term, and see exactly how not only these catchers will fit with their current teams, but also the prospects that got traded, and see exactly how the shakeup to the catcher market is going to affect each of the three teams involved in these two deals. Before we begin, it would mean a ton if you can subscribe to the channel. It will get you more trade deadline coverage like this. I'll plan to cover as many trades as I can, as we are now just under 4 days away from the MLB Trade Deadline. You'll also get more baseball content from me and other great YouTubers out there as well. Without further ado, let's dive into these two deals that have completely shaped the catching market ahead of the 2025 Trade Deadline. You've been watching Danny Jansen highlights throughout this entire video, and he is an offensive catcher. Of course, you're going to see some of those defensive highlights, but at his core, he is an offensive catcher. He provides support there. Right now, his catching framing runs for 2025 is at -8, so he's not a standout framer behind the dish. He's definitely serviceable. He's not a bad catcher. It's not like a situation where you're not getting any actual value from him. Something like Ryan Domit comes to mind, who really was a poor framer and still provided offensive value, which is why he got its starts. He's a serviceable backstop, but he's not going to be someone who's going to provide you immense defensive value. You can see this distinction in his WAR, as Baseball Reference does not take into account framing data into their WAR calculations, while Fangraphs does. And on Fangraphs, he has 0.7 WAR so far in 2025. But if you go to his Baseball Reference page, that's already as high as 1.8. That's a very big discrepancy. It just goes to show you he's really not the best framer. Again, it's not like he's a horrible defensive catcher, but by no means is he a good, serviceable catcher behind the dish. You really want him for its offensive value. He has a 99 WRC plus, a 97 OPS plus so far in 2025, which, again, for a catcher, that's fine because you are expected to be less offensively valuable because you're playing a difficult position. His StatCast framing data really shows just how poor defensively he is. He is tied for last in terms of catcher framing runs with Will Smith, although he does have less pitches actually caught, about 500 less, and right now you're talking about 2,000 or so pitches for each, so that's a big jump off. He's not the worst framer. That definitely will likely go to Will Smith, but still not great, and his strike rate is also pretty low at 40.4% of all of his pitches. And we look by a zone-by-zone basis with the outside of the strike zone. So StatCast zone has 8 different, basically, shadow zones, which are the area right between the border, to see what those strike rates are. And there's only one area where he's actually above average, and that's that bottom right corner of the zone, stealing strikes there at 27.2%. So definitely struggles a bit behind the plate. You're seeing now that he does have a very good arm behind the plate, though. He is good at catching batters stealing, so there is some value there beyond just having framing being a negative impact to his game. And again, we've already talked a little bit offensively about what he provides. He is only hitting for a 204 batting average, but he walks a ton. He has a 314 on base percentage, definitely serviceable for someone who plays the catcher position. That is almost walking 1 out of every 10 times, actually a little more than that technically. So he definitely is a very good eye for at the plate and making sure that he can walk and get on base and provide some offensive value even if he isn't hitting. His numbers are a bit down from his time in Toronto, especially those first couple years, 2020, 2021, 2022. He was hitting 223, 260, 228. Those numbers are a little bit lower in 2024 combined. He was just above the Mendoza line at 205 for his batting average, about the same as where he is now. But his on-base percentage has always been really high, almost always been at least 60 points above his batting average, and the lower his batting average, the more he's walked. So definitely not a bad position to be in. If you're going to have a low batting average, you better walk. And right now, across 73 games, he's got 33 walks. Solid, nothing great, but good enough for a catcher. The player heading back to Tampa Bay in this deal is Jadher Areinamo. He is pronounced just like Nolan Arenado's last name, but just with an M instead of an N. and he is definitely a defense first shortstop. He has a decent hit tool, no power, but he has a cannon for an arm, and he also has a really solid range at shortstop. Scouts definitely see him fitting at shortstop long term. There's upside that maybe because of the offensive abilities that he kind of fits as a really good second baseman because of the defensive capabilities, or more of a utility guy because the offense really isn't there. But he definitely could be a starting shortstop that could bat 9 long term. Again, it's all about the upside. Can he tap into a little bit more power? Can he hit the ball a little bit more? Increase his average, and he could maybe be a really solid back end of the lineup, starting shortstop with great defense. Maybe Gold Glove, that might be a stretch, maybe one in his career, but definitely not out of the possibility. He was voted the best defensive second baseman in High A in 2024, and that's something to be noted, especially since he only signed for $150,000 in 2021. That's a good return on your investment if you're the Milwaukee Brewers. Areinamo is definitely a solid hitter, as I've already mentioned. He actually led the Midwest League in 2024 batting average at 301 and in doubles with 30 solid numbers. He hit 306 in 103 games in the Carolina League in 2023 as well. So he has the ability to hit for average and be a solid contributor there. In terms of speed, his career high is 32. That probably translates to somewhere between 5 and 10 at the major league level. Nothing super great. Steals in the minor leagues definitely do not translate to steals in the major leagues. So it's just something to keep a note when you're looking at those numbers. But he really has a chance to be a very solid player, especially at only 5'8". If he maybe grows a little bit, he's 21. Odds are probably pretty low, but crazier things have happened. He could definitely be a solid player going forward. So far in 2025, he has a 297, 355, 463 slash line across 97 games. He's also got 11 home runs. He had 10 last year, so maybe there's a little bit of a power increase. 15 steals so far this year, so definitely some ability there. Again, the power probably isn't going to translate super well to the major league level. There's a chance, but really he's at a very hitter friendly place in high A right now. So I wouldn't worry too much about seeing those numbers and being like he's going to hit 15, 20 at the major league level. Highly, highly doubtful. Crazier things have happened, but at only 5'8", power is probably not a long term part of his game as he approaches higher levels. He tends to swing and miss a lot, which is a bit of a concern, especially because you don't have that power, that kind of trade off to get your OPS up, which a lot of teams really like to use the metric. So we'll see. If he can continue spraying the ball around all fields as he has been, he will be a solid piece, but he's not going to be a top of the order, speedster, get on base kind of guy. He's just going to be a nice back end of the lineup, 7, 8, 9 guy who can hit the ball, get you on base, and kind of let that lineup turn over, get your top guys more opportunities to hit, while also providing very good defense as a second baseman or even as a shortstop at the major league level. Going from one of the worst defensive catchers in Danny Jansen, who again is playing a hard position, playing fine defense, to one of the best in Nick Fortes, who has 2 framing runs, which is above most players. Only 16 catchers in all of baseball have at least 2, and only 23 actually have a positive catcher framing run value. So definitely a solid player there. And he also steals a decent amount of strikes. He's about middle of the pack, 46.8% strike rate, which is almost 8% above what Danny Jansen has. Definitely an above average catcher defensively. But trading off with Jansen is that he's not the best offensively. So far this year, he only has a 76 OPS plus, which is slightly above his career average, but just goes to show you that he's not going to provide you a lot of value offensively. The catcher only, really all he's going to do is provide you solid defensive value. The 240, 288, 347 slash line so far in 2025. You can see the drastic shift in the offensive value based on the numbers I've said for Jansen and Fortes, but they actually have the exact same F4 right now, which goes to show you just how much better defensively Fortes is. Again, Jansen might be one of the worst defensive catchers in the league, but he's not a bad defensive catcher. There's definitely some of those out there who are now being shifted off of the catcher position as people learn more and more. But Jansen's offensive value definitely provides enough support for him to stay behind the plate, even if he might not be the best. Fortes, on the other hand, really is solely dependent on his ability to catch after being drafted in the 4th round of the 2018 draft out of Ole Miss. The Rays already have guys who aren't great offensively. Matt Thaiss is going to be the one who's going to split catching duties with him so far in Tampa Bay. Taylor Walls is their starting shortstop, and he is 100% a defensively minded shortstop. That's really the only reason he has a job, because he has great range at shortstop. Tristan Gray, relatively new to the major leagues, only about 50 plate appearances, not going to provide a ton of offensive value at 29. Jake Madden, also 29, very fresh before the start of the year. There's definitely some room for offensive growth in the Rays, but they think that they can get more out of Forte and probably unlock a little bit more as he is still under team control for a couple more years, which has to be part of the value that they are now getting from Fortes. In return, the Rays are trading away one of the pieces they got in the Zach Eflin trade in Matthew Etzel, a 10th round pick in the 2023 MLB draft by those Orioles, and he played college at a bunch of different places. He only spent a semester at Texas A&M and then 2 seasons at a junior college in Texas, and his stint in the MLB Draft League was really where people got their eye on him and where he says he found his ability to love playing baseball more than he ever had before. After playing in the draft league, he ended up transferring to Southern Mississippi, which is a very solid college baseball school for those who are unfamiliar. And he did very well there in his senior year before signing with the Orioles for $167,000 out of the 10th round. Many players cite the jump from high A to double A as the most difficult in all the minor leagues, and for Etzel, it definitely rang true. For high A Aberdeen with the Baltimore Orioles, he hit for an 857 OPS. Then, as he moved up to double A, that dropped down to a 729. And once he got traded to the Rays and joined Montgomery, their double A affiliate, that OPS dropped down to 692. He's not doing much better so far in 2025, a 707 OPS at double A Montgomery. So those offensive numbers are really not tracking now that he's reached double A. The lefty's already 23, which is something that you definitely want to see someone really succeeding at that level, but it's also known that he doesn't have a ton of power. He has more than Areinamo, who the Rays just acquired, but it's not wholly coming together right now at double A for him. He is definitely a speedster, though. He is rated to have above average speed, which is one of his calling cards. So for 17 stolen bases this year, nothing super great, but he does have 45 last year, which shows that he could definitely be someone who steals maybe 20 bases or more at the major league level at his peak. He has some decent defensive chops. He's not going to be a stellar center fielder, but maybe he could do it long term at the major league level. More likely, he's pushed to a corner, which means the offensive value has to tick up. There's a lot of worry there. He's never actually made it on Baseball America's top prospects list for the Rays or the Orioles, and he was at number 28 to start the season for the Rays on MLB Pipeline. And although they just did a re rank, he was low enough that he wasn't going to be someone who was actually going to be shifted in his position. I wouldn't be shocked when they actually update things after the trade deadline that he won't be on the Marlins top 30, even though the Marlins do have a relatively weak farm system. If he does, I wouldn't be shocked if it's 25 or lower. I don't expect him to be a highly ranked prospect within the system. Now that I've talked about all the players in this deal, let's actually give grades to each of the three teams. And remember, it is technically a two-team deal. The Rays made two separate trades, but we're going to treat this as one because it really all one hinged on the other. If they weren't going to get Fortes, they were not going to go ahead and trade Danny Jansen in this deal, most likely. For the Milwaukee Brewers, I'll give them a solid A+. I think this is exactly what they needed. The Brewers are known to have a catching lab. They can do amazing things defensively with catchers, and Danny Jansen is definitely in need of some improvement. Again, not a horrible defensive catcher, because every MLB catcher at the major league level now is not a bad catcher, but one of the worst when you look at the scale of actual defense at the catcher position currently playing at the major league level. The Brewers also needed a catcher, and I know you're probably thinking, what in the world do you mean the Brewers need a catcher? They have one of the best catchers in baseball. They definitely don't need another catcher, especially someone who is going to want to play every day because he has the caliber to do so. But unfortunately for the Brewers, their catcher, William Contreras, has been dealing with a hand injury basically the entire season, and he's been catching almost every day. Eric Haase is not really going to cut it long term as a backup catcher, especially on a championship winning team. No offense to him. So now you're bringing in someone who can be a better catcher, give you more days off. Haase, over the past 6 days, has played catcher once. Now you can give Contreras more days off. You don't have to worry about that as much. You can play Christian Yelich in the field a little bit more often right now. He's rotating left field DH about one a day on, 1 day off, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. So there's options there. There's a lot of opportunity to kind of shake up your lineup and be in a better place to make a deep playoff run when you're really looking to improve your weakest position, which is the fact that your catcher is hurt and can't play at full strength. Contreras getting healthy is so important for the Brewers, especially with how deep their rotation is, and I think this is definitely a win for them. Jansen's also on an expiring deal, so the Brewers have a little bit more flexibility to see what they want to do next year, especially with Jefferson Cuero, a top prospect waiting in the wings to be another catcher to support them. This is a short-term fix, especially because Cuero is injured. They can now go and cement themselves as contenders this year and use their prospects to cement themselves as contenders going forward. For the Marlins, I'll give this trade a C. Fortes is definitely starter caliber, but he's fallen out of favor because of Agustin Ramirez and what he's done for the Miami Marlins. This also frees up a spot to actually make Ramirez DH a little bit more often because it might come as a surprise, but the Marlins have another top 100 prospect in the minor leagues in catcher Joe Mack, who was their first round pick in the 2021 MLB draft, and he is definitely hot at AAA, and he's ready to make his major league debut. And given that he has to be added to the 40-man before the end of next season, you might as well go ahead, just make sure he's protected now, call him up, and see what he can do. You also have players currently on the roster who can also play catcher. I'm looking at Liam Hicks, a Rule 5 pick from Detroit, who had caught last Friday. So there is still options if you're looking for a lefty. Joe Mack is also a lefty, but you maybe want to move Hicks there if you're not sure Mack is ready. But when I'm looking at the trade itself, I don't know if Matthew Etzel is enough to get Nick Fortes in my eye. Yes, you're now at a little bit of disadvantage because teams know you have a top prospect at the catching position coming up, and you have a star who's catching half of his days playing in the major leagues. But Nick Fortes is still a valuable piece with multiple years, options if you'd like it, and he's only 28. Yes, it's a little bit old, but still some value there. And I don't know if Matthew Etzel really matches what I would want out of a player who I'm getting for Nick Fortes. Of course, again, as I said, leverage is a little bit low just based on the position the Marlins are in. But Agustin Ramirez has questions on his ability to catch long term. He might have to move to first base. He might have to move to DH. And I think it's valuable to keep Fortes in the fold a little bit, maybe train him a little bit more defensively because I don't really trust the Marlins player development. Have them work one-on-one and improve that. And maybe you have Mack, who is also a great defensive catcher, and Ramirez as a great 1-2 tandem where you have Ramirez DH the day that Mack is catching or play first. There's options, but now I have even less confidence they can stick a catcher long term and more confidence it's going to have to move to first base, which unfortunately is going to be tough. Again, they have a great catcher to replace him, but a Fortes and Joe Mack tandem at catcher with Ramirez starting at first base or DH is great. And if you are going to trade Fortes, I would want someone who maybe has a little bit more upside. Etzel is definitely a proximity play. He could play very soon at the major league level, but his offensive numbers are lacking right now. He doesn't project to be a solid offensive player, which makes it hard to put him in the corner outfield spot. And his defense is not great enough to be a good center fielder where those offensive issues don't really matter. And for the Rays, I'll give them an A- for this deal. I think there is a little bit of downgrade from Jansen to Fortes, but I think that makes up in value when you look at who they've acquired and who they gave away. Etzel, I don't think necessarily had a spot in Tampa Bay long term, just given the dearth of prospects that they have and people who are really trying to make the major league roster and are looking really, really great doing that. Curtis Mead is a former top 100 prospect who is doing very well right now. Carson Williams, a shortstop, who's doing very well. Trey Morgan might have to move to a corner outfield spot long term. Right, you're looking at a lot of players who are really close to the major league level, but would have to push some players out and make it difficult to really get some playing time for someone like Matthew Etzel. It's a tough place to be, but they really like Johnny DeLuca. They really like Christopher Morel, right? They really like Jose Caballero, who can play a little bit of outfield. So what exactly do they do but trade away someone who really is kind of blocked at the major league level by a lot of talent? Outfield is not the Rays' strongest suit, but the fact that they weren't willing to see him play super well at the major league level kind of tells me that they don't view him as a great asset, which is why the Marlins' grade is so low. But also the fact that they got someone in return who is an above average shortstop defensively and can maybe even hit for average and be a really good back end piece. Maybe you let Taylor Walls walk and you bring him in once he gets to be ready to play at the major league level in a couple years. And I think things are really solid for the Rays in this deal. Jadher Areinamo, I think, is a better prospect than Etzel, and I think the gap between Jansen and Fortes is less than the gap between Areinamo and the player they traded away in Matthew Etzel. So I think in that case, it's a win, and of course, the Rays are still kind of in the mix in the AL wildcard, which is why this is a little lower. You're downgrading your current roster, which if you're looking to win right now, that's not a good thing, but crazier things have happened. Thank you so much for watching the end of this video. I hope you like this breakdown of this really interesting two deals, kind of one. If you want to see more content like this, please go ahead and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the very next video.